So he says that something is valid, and when those people do that, he demonizes them by lying about them, by mischaracterizing them. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, welcome back to another video, everyone. So recently I was going through Instagram and I saw a post that caught my attention, right? It is titled, New Atheism has a race problem. Has scientific racism made a comeback? And it intrigued me. So I went through it, I read it, and to say the least, there are flaws in it, right? And today I want to point those out and point out why they are flaws, right? So let's begin. So that's the cover image, right? And right next to it, in the second image, right, there's a quote by Dr. Sam Harris, and it reads as the following: "The people who speak the most sensibly about the threat that Islam poses to Europe are actually fascists." Now that seems really sinister. Did Sam Harris say it? If so, what is the context in which he said it? Unfortunately, the post provides absolutely no context or no source for this quote. And it is for good reason, because if it did, right, people would go to the source, read the quote in its proper context, and realize that this post is misrepresenting Sam Harris. In fact, it's almost presenting Sam Harris as holding on to a position that is actually quite opposite of his actual position. So, what does this quote mean? Where is it from? Well, thankfully, I know exactly where it is from. It is from an article that Sam Harris published back in 2006. That's right, 14 years ago. Let me just give you an idea of the kind of thing that Sam Harris was saying within this article. Within this article, Sam Harris writes, quote, "This is not to say that we are at war with all Muslims, but we are absolutely at war with those who believe that death in the defense of the faith is the highest possible good, that cartoonists should be killed for caricaturing the Prophet, and that any Muslim who loses his faith should be butchered for apostasy." Unquote. I hope that all of us can have some sense of moral clarity and admit that the kind of people that Sam Harris described, right, these are actually problematic, right? So Sam Harris, when he was tackling this issue of these kinds of people, right, that he described, right, he was tackling that issue and he was pointing out that liberals generally were not willing to make this admission, right? And that is a real problem. He goes on to write, quote, "While liberals should be the ones who pointing the way beyond this Iron Age madness, they are rendering themselves increasingly irrelevant. Being generally reasonable and tolerant of diversity, liberals should be especially sensitive to the dangers of religious literalism, but they aren't." Unquote. So, although the original post presented it as though Sam Harris was aligning himself with the fascists, he was not. All he was doing, right, was recognizing a real problem, right, as we have admitted is a real problem, and then he was worried about the fact that most liberals were not willing to make this recognition. He was saying that, as liberals, we should be the ones making this recognition, right? And then he was worried about the kind of thing that it implied, right? He was worried about letting the fascists be the only ones who are willing to make this obvious recognition. It was not a praise of the fascists. It was a worry that they will gain popularity, right? That was the problem, right? That is the point that Sam Harris was making. I think the final sentence of this article is something that sums it all up really well. It reads, quote, "To say that this does not bode well for liberalism is an understatement. It does not bode well for the future of civilization." Unquote. Right? So, and I recommend that you read the whole article if you're interested, a link to which will be in the description. Alright, so that's the point that Sam Harris was making, right? And I hope you can see now that the post was an utter mischaracterization of Sam Harris, and this trend continues throughout the entire post, as we will soon see. Okay, so in this next image of the post, the original creator goes on to give a definition of scientific racism. He writes, quote, "Scientific racism is the belief that scientific evidence exists to prove the racial inferiority of black people and other people of color. Scientific studies have been used to justify slavery, the Holocaust, apartheid, eugenics, forced sterilization, segregation. Despite being debunked and race being declared nothing to do with biology, following World War II, these theories still appear in a number of scientific fields." And while I could say a few things to that, I'm perfectly willing to work with this. But before we proceed, I want to make my position clear. I am well aware that scientific racism was a real thing, that it was a very problematic thing, and that pseudoscientific studies were used to try to excuse racism, right? So that's my position on scientific racism, and I really don't have much to say about this image in this post. We can work with this. Let's move on. In this next image, the creator goes on to give us a definition of New Atheism. So let's read that. He writes, quote, "New Atheism took off around 2004 with a number of books being published by scientists that identified as New Atheists, a move away from atheists that were traditionally associated with the far left, communists, and Marxist ideology," unquote. Let's stop there for a while before we read the next paragraph in this same image. He says that New Atheism took off with books being published by scientists who identified as New Atheists. That's not true. The term New Atheist comes from media commentary on a number of books being published by atheists who are not necessarily scientists, right? Even in this post, he goes on to talk about 4 specific people, of which only 2 were scientists, right? And we'll see that soon. But yeah, I think that's an interesting detail that could be pointed out. He says that it's a move away from atheists that were associated with the far left Marxist communist ideologies. That's not accurate, right? Because these atheists, the ones that he talks about in his posts, do not behold atheism to any particular political ideology, right? They all define atheism very accurately, I'd say, as a lack of belief in God, right? Atheism is not beholden to any political ideology. So I'm not sure about what that part even meant, right? He then goes on to write, quote, "New atheists use scientific respectability," within inverted commas, while critiquing religion using the same methods that eugenics advocates have used throughout history, unquote. The same methods that eugenics advocates have used throughout history. Which methods? There is no reference to these methods in his entire post. What kind of methods are we talking about here? Evidence, context, where is it? It's completely missing. Okay, so the next image in this post is a quote from Professor Richard Dawkins, and it is as follows. Quote, "It is one thing to deplore eugenics on ideological, political, moral grounds. It is quite another to conclude that it wouldn't work in practice. Of course it would. It works for cows, horses, pigs, dogs, and roses. Why on earth wouldn't it work for humans? Facts ignore ideology." Now, I am quite frankly astonished. Posting this makes it look like Richard Dawkins believes the exact opposite of what he actually believes. Why on earth would you do this? Right? Thankfully, I know exactly where this quote comes from, even though the original creator didn't bother to provide a reference. Because of course he didn't. Because if he did, people would check that reference and know that Richard Dawkins doesn't actually hold on to the stance that the creator is making it look like he does, right? This quote is a tweet from Richard Dawkins, right? And in the very next tweet, right, in a reply to that tweet, Richard Dawkins makes clear what he meant, right? And so let me show that to you, right? So here you can see the original tweet by Professor Richard Dawkins, which is exactly what the original creator copied, right? And in the next tweet, Richard Dawkins writes, "For those determined to miss the point, I deplore the idea of eugenic policy. I deplore the idea of eugenic policy. I simply said deploring it doesn't mean it wouldn't work. Just as we breed cows to yield more milk, we could breed humans to run faster or jump higher, but heaven forbid that we should do it." Unquote. Right? So Richard Dawkins is quite clearly against eugenics, right? But that's not the way it looks from that original post. Richard Dawkins made another tweet, and that reads as follows, quote, "A eugenic policy would be bad. I am combating the illogical step from X would be bad to X is impossible. It would work in the same sense as it works for cows. Let's fight it on moral grounds. Deny obvious scientific facts and we lose or at best derail the argument." Unquote. So Richard Dawkins is not saying that eugenics is good. He is not supporting eugenics. He says that it would work, right? And even then we should oppose it, right? That's the point. Richard Dawkins has said that even though it works, we should still oppose it, right? He is not in support of eugenics. But that's not the way it seems from the original post. And it's almost certain that the original creator knew this, right? Because he copied the first tweet of a thread, but completely left out the remaining two tweets that Richard Dawkins added to that thread. So yeah, there you have it, a misrepresentation of Richard Dawkins. Let's move on. Okay, in the next image, he goes on to list the people he has a problem with. He writes, who are they? Richard Dawkins called Islam one of the greatest evils in the world. Richard Dawkins criticizes Islam, not Muslims, right? He criticizes religion, not the people, right? He hates the doctrine, right? The dogma, not Muslims, right? And this person, interestingly, in the same post, writes later on, and we'll get to that part in more detail soon, but he says religious critique is valid, right? This original creator, he says that religious critique is valid. So that's what Richard Dawkins does, right? He is not spewing hatred for Muslims, he is criticizing Islam, the religion. And this is not just me doing some kind of mental acrobatics to defend someone. No, Richard Dawkins has made this position very clear, very publicly, right? In fact, he was one of the first people I saw who making this distinction between Islam and Muslims, right? So I'll give you a few examples of when Richard Dawkins has done this. On the 31st of May 2017, Richard Dawkins tweeted out, quote, "If you believe disliking Islam implies disliking Muslims or precludes disliking Trump, please go away and learn how to think." Unquote. Right? So he is making very clear that disliking Islam does not mean disliking Muslims, right? So there's one example, but I'll give you one more. On 27 March 2019, Richard Dawkins tweeted this out. Quote, "I hate cancer." Someone replies, "Aha, so you hate cancer sufferers, bigot." The principal sufferers from Islam are Muslims, especially women and homosexuals. Muslimophilia can inspire and justify Islamophobia. Unquote. So Richard Dawkins doesn't hate Muslims, which, if he did, would be a real problem, right? It is the opposite, right? He cares for Muslims like he does for all other people, and therefore he has a problem with Islam. It is because of his concern for Muslims that he hates the ideology which causes suffering onto them. Clearly, this should not be a problem. I hope that we can all have the moral clarity to admit that, right? That being concerned for a group of people and disliking the ideology that causes them suffering should not be a problem, right? That is not something for which someone should be condemned. Okay, next person he goes on to list is Sam Harris. He writes, Sam Harris has argued torture is acceptable for anyone who looks Muslim. Where is the reference to this? When did Sam Harris say this? There is no reference provided to this. I doubt Sam ever said such a thing. But I don't have to prove that he didn't. This person is making the claim that he did, so he must provide evidence for it. He hasn't provided any evidence. He then goes on to write, Sam Harris is anti-Black Lives Matter. That has to be one of the most lazy analysis of someone's view that I have ever encountered. Right? Sam Harris on Black Lives Matter put out a 2-hour podcast episode about what he thinks. Right? And to conclude that 2-hour podcast by saying that Sam is anti-Black Lives Matter is incredibly lazy, right? That is not a great way to summarize Sam's views. Here's a clip from that episode, right, which makes Sam's position on racism in America very clear.
Right. This is precisely the kind of police behavior that everyone should find abhorrent. Now, on the general topic of racism in America, I want to make a few similarly clear and preemptive statements. Racism is still a problem in American society. No question. And slavery, which was racism's most evil expression, was this country's founding sin. And we should also add the near total eradication of the Native Americans to that ledger of evil. Any morally sane person who learns the details of these historical injustices finds them shocking, whatever their race. And the legacy of these crimes that were perpetrated for centuries, remains a cause for serious moral concern today. I have no doubt about this, right? And nothing I'm about to say should suggest otherwise.
I hope that it's clear from that clip that Sam is not a racist asshole, as this post seems to imply, right? So again, a complete misrepresentation. Next, he writes, Christopher Hitchens criticized the left's tolerance of religion. That is arguably the stupidest thing I've read all week. And definitely the stupidest thing that's in this post. Is that how we're doing this now? Then even I could write the problem with this guy, the creator of this post. Criticized Christopher Hitchens criticizing the left's tolerance of religion. Right? Is that really how we're going to play this? Besides, that's a complete mischaracterization of what Hitchens did. Another mischaracterization. Are you surprised? I certainly am not. Hitchens disliked religion, and he criticized religion, and he was very vocal about it, right? And he criticized anyone who coddled up to religion, right? It didn't matter to him whether it was the right or the left, right? He was anti-religion, and he would take on anyone who supported it. That's what Hitchens did. Why are you writing that Hitchens criticized the left's tolerance of religion? He was equally, if not more, against the right's championing of religion. But you're not going to mention that now, are you? Why not? because it doesn't help in demonizing these people, in demonizing Christopher Hitchens? I don't know, you tell me. And you could say, but Aditya, we have to respect people's right to follow their religion. And you're absolutely correct. I agree. And so did Hitchens. Here is a clip of him saying just that.
To Christopher is how you can justify wanting to take something away from people, from 95, that gives meaning to 95% of the American people, and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people.
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so, as Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on, and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys.
And Hitchens went even further than this. He said that not only would he never forcefully take religion away from people, right? He has also said that even if he could convince everyone on planet Earth that religion is false, he wouldn't do it. Trust me, he really said that. Actually, you don't have to trust me, because I'll give you evidence and references. Something that someone didn't do. Here you go.
If I could convert everyone in the world, not convert, if I could convince to be a non-believer, and I'd really done brilliantly, and there was only one left, one more, and then it'd be done. And there'd be no more religion in the world, no more deism. I wouldn't do it.
Next, he goes on to write about Bill Maher. I don't know if I've pronounced that name right, but he says Bill Maher makes money from promoting Islamophobic ideology and jokes all Muslims are terrorists. Now, I don't follow Bill Maher as closely or even at all, to be honest. So I don't know if Bill Maher does that. But based on what we have seen in this entire post, I think we can make a few bets about what is more likely. So I don't know how true this is, but yeah. Okay, next image. Islamophobia as science. While Islam is not a race, the majority of believers are black and brown. Sure. Religious critique is valid, remember that part. But New Atheism has focused heavily on demonizing Muslims. That's not true, right? I've already provided references within this video earlier that these people that he talks about, right, are not out there demonizing Muslims, right? They're criticizing Islam, and they're making very clear that they are not against all Muslims, right? They make it very clear that they don't have a problem with Muslims, but rather with Islam. They are criticizing religion, which this guy says is valid. So he says that something is valid, and when those people do that, he demonizes them by lying about them, by mischaracterizing them. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, he continues to write, particularly after 9/11, New Atheism has quickly moved to the far right, supporting torture, nuclear bombing, and military interventions in Muslim countries. Nuclear bombing. What is the reference for this? Supporting torture, nuclear bombing, and military interventions? what is the reference for this? Is there any reference provided for this? No, of course there isn't. Right? It's not me who has to prove that these people that he talks about did not support these things. Right? It is he who is making the assertion that they did it, and therefore he has to provide proof. Where is the proof? Where is the reference? Where is the evidence? There is none of it, because of course there isn't. Final image of this post. Claiming their opinions are rational by reading literal interpretations of religious texts, or not, as Dawkins admitted, he had never actually read the Quran, and using Islamophobic tropes to push their ideology, new atheists have exposed themselves as disguising racism as science. Okay, few things there. They are not claiming themselves to be rational because they have read literal interpretations of religious texts, right? They make various claims and they provide various rationalizations for those claims, right? Each individual claim requires its own justification, right? So you'll have to provide which claim you're talking about here, because they are not saying we are correct because, we subscribe to the literal reading of the Quran or the Bible or the Torah. No, they make various claims and they provide various rationalizations for it, as they should, right? Okay, next, you say they use Islamophobic tropes to push their ideology. First of all, a problematic thing would be anti-Muslim bigotry, right? That would be hatred for Muslims, right? That's a real problem. So, are they using any kind of tropes related to that to push their ideology? If so, what are those? You can't simply just say that they're doing so. You have to prove it, right? You have to provide references. Where is your reference? Right? And finally, you go on to write that the new atheists have exposed themselves as disguising racism as science. As I hope that I have demonstrated, they are not, right? But I think we can certainly say one thing, that you as in the original creator of the post, not the viewer of this video, that this guy has certainly exposed himself to be incredibly dishonest by straight up lying about the new atheists, right? By mischaracterizing them, by taking them out of context to present them as though they believe the exact opposite of what they actually believe. This guy, the original creator, has demonstrated himself to be incredibly dishonest. I wonder why he's doing this. I truly do. But alas, perhaps he'll see this video, and if you want to reach me, my contact information is in the description. But as always, thank you for the view, and I've been Aditya Prakash, or Soytheist. You can follow me on social media here. If you like what I do, you can support me on patreon.com/Soytheist. And if you like the video, leave a like. If you love the video, don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video.